Linda Ronstadt never wrote her own songs. She didn't need to. She had the greatest ears in music. These are 7 albums she calls absolutely untouchable. 7. 40 greatest hits. Linda Ronstadt grew up with Hank Williams in the house. Her sister owned all his records, and those songs played constantly throughout her childhood in Tucson.
I have the invitation that you sent me.
By the time she was old enough to understand what she was hearing, Williams had already shaped the way she thought about music. He wrote about real things: heartbreak, loneliness, the feeling of being lost with no map and no compass. Nothing was dressed up or made pretty. It was just the truth, delivered plainly, and that honesty hit harder than anything else she had ever heard. When Ronstadt started making her own records, she went straight back to Williams.
It's interesting, I mean, for me, because I'd never acted before, but what it seemed to me...
She covered I Can't Help It If I'm Still in Love With You on Heart Like a Wheel and won her first Grammy for it. That wasn't an accident. It was a singer paying her deepest debt to the man who taught her what a song was supposed to do. Williams proved that country music didn't need to be complicated to be devastating. A simple melody, a few honest words, and a voice that meant every syllable. Ronstadt carried that lesson into every studio she ever walked into. The 40 Greatest Hits collection gathered everything that mattered from a career that burned bright and ended far too soon. For a young girl in Arizona listening to her sister's records, it was the beginning of everything. Hank Williams didn't just influence Linda Ronstadt. He built the foundation she stood on for her entire life. Every great country song she ever recorded carried a little piece of him inside it, whether she named him or not. 6. Showcase. Linda Ronstadt worshipped Patsy Cline. She grew up in Arizona on a steady diet of country radio, and Cline's voice was the one that stopped everything else cold. There was nobody like her. Nobody could take a song and fill it so completely that there was no room left for anything else. Showcase came out in 1961, and it contained Crazy, one of the greatest vocal performances in the history of recorded music. Willie Nelson wrote it, but Patsy Cline owned it the moment she opened her mouth. Ronstadt heard that record and understood something fundamental about what singing actually meant.
I mean, it just wouldn't come. It would go and we'd find these tunes and they would sort of miraculously slip away. It was like trying to...
Cline showed Ronstadt that a woman could stand at the front of a song and command it completely. No apology, no softening, just pure authority delivered with total confidence. That was a radical thing in the early 60s, and Ronstadt absorbed every second of it. She covered Crazy herself on her 1976 album Hasten Down the Wind, not because she thought she could improve on the original, but because the song lived inside her and needed to come out. That was how Ronstadt always worked. She sang things that were part of her, songs she had carried around for years before she finally recorded them. Patsy Cline put those songs inside her in the first place. Showcase remains one of the purest vocal records ever made, a woman singing with complete honesty and zero self-protection. Ronstadt returned to it throughout her life, always finding something new to learn from a singer who packed more emotion into 3 minutes than most artists managed in an entire career. Cline died young, but everything she left behind was enough to last forever. 5. Pet Sounds. Linda Ronstadt never stopped talking about Brian Wilson. She covered In My Room early in her career, drawn immediately to the emotional weight that Wilson packed into such a small space. Pet Sounds came out in 1966, and it changed everything about what a pop record could be.
Wouldn't it be nice if we were older, then we wouldn't have to...
Wilson heard arrangements in his head that nobody else could hear, and somehow he found a way to pull them out and lay them down on tape. The production was unlike anything that existed at the time, orchestral and intimate at the same time. Layers of sound building on top of each other until the whole record felt alive and breathing. Ronstadt came from the same West Coast landscape that produced the Beach Boys. She grew up breathing the same California air, and she recognized in their music something deeply true about that particular American experience.
To take it out of being taken for granted so much. I mean, those songs are just brilliant little pieces of American craftsmanship.
The sadness sitting just underneath all that sunshine and melody was something she understood completely. God Only Knows, Wouldn't It Be Nice? Caroline numbers songs about longing and the particular ache of knowing that beautiful things end. Ronstadt spent her entire career chasing the kind of emotional honesty that Wilson achieved on this record. and she found it in her own way every time she stepped up to a microphone. She understood that making something delicate required just as much courage as making something loud and powerful. Wilson was completely vulnerable on every track, and the album was stronger for it. Pet Sounds proved that pop music could break your heart just as completely as any blues record. Linda Ronstadt carried that lesson with her into every session she ever recorded, always believing that tenderness was never a weakness. In music, it was always the most powerful thing in the room. 4. Blue. Linda Ronstadt put Joni Mitchell in a category completely her own. She said it plainly in interviews throughout her life. Mitchell was different from everybody else on the planet.
And that's how they get really good. And how you know a musician is they can't put that guitar down. It's not like they have to practice.
Blue came out in 1971, and it remains one of the most emotionally exposed records ever made by anyone in any genre.
Acid, booze, and ass, needles, guns, and grass, lots of laughs.
Mitchell wrote every song from a place so personal and so unguarded that listening felt almost intrusive, like reading someone's private letters without permission. The melodies were unlike anything else in folk or pop music, complex and unpredictable, going places that normal songs never went. Ronstadt covered songs by Mitchell and spoke about her with reverence every chance she got. What she admired most was the completeness of Mitchell's vision. Every element of Blue served the emotional truth of the record, the sparse production, the open guitar tunings, the voice that could be tender and sharp in the same breath. Mitchell wrote about love and loss and travel and freedom with a specificity that made every listener feel she was describing their own life. Ronstadt was an interpreter by nature, and Blue was the standard against which she measured all great songwriting. She told interviewers that Mitchell and Paul Simon wrote genuine art songs, melodies sophisticated enough to belong in a classical tradition while still connecting with a popular audience. Blue sat at the center of everything Ronstadt believed music could and should be. It was not just a great record. It was a way of thinking about what honesty in music actually looked like when someone had the courage to practice it without compromise or hesitation. Mitchell never flinched. That was the lesson. 3. Abbey Road. Linda Ronstadt grew up hearing the Beatles at exactly the right moment. Their music was genuinely new when it reached her, and she understood instinctively that something had changed forever. Abbey Road came out in 1969, and it was the last thing they recorded together.
He wear no shoe shine, he got toe jam football, he got.
A band making their farewell with everything they had left. The second side in particular, that long suite of connected songs running from You Never Give Me Your Money through the end, was unlike anything attempted on a pop record before. It was a band saying goodbye in the most beautiful way possible, and Ronstadt heard every single note of it. What she took from Abbey Road was the idea of generosity in music.
I love the songs. I've known most of them. I've known all my life, and I just wanted to sing them very badly.
Nobody in the Beatles was bigger than the song. Nobody took up more space than they needed. George Harrison's Something was one of the greatest love songs ever written, delivered with a quiet confidence that never needed to announce itself. John Lennon and Paul McCartney wrote melodies that seemed to have existed forever, as if they had simply been waiting to be found. Ringo Starr played only what each moment required and never one beat more. That kind of collective discipline was something Ronstadt practiced in her own way every time she stepped into a recording studio. She always served the song rather than herself, always put the material first and her own ego last. Abbey Road showed her that the greatest music was always about something larger than the people making it. A band at the end of its life made one of the most alive records in history. That was the kind of miracle Linda Ronstadt spent her whole career chasing. 2. Exile on Main Street. Linda Ronstadt had a genuine and deep love for the Rolling Stones that went beyond admiration.
Rolling Stone, in its infinite wisdom, had declared that, funk was God at some point.
She studied Mick Jagger specifically, learning from his ability to take a song written by someone else and make it sound like it had always lived inside him. That was her entire artistic philosophy described in one sentence, and she found its purest expression in everything Jagger did. Exile on Main Street came out in 1972, and it was the Stones at their most sprawling and human.
He don't come around no more. Is it checking out for sure?
A double album recorded in a basement in the south of France that sounded like people who had nothing left to prove and everything left to say. Ronstadt covered Tumbling Dice from this record on her 1977 album Simple Dreams and turned it into something that felt entirely her own while remaining unmistakably theirs. That was the highest compliment a song could receive from her. Exile on Main Street ran through blues and gospel and country rock and honky-tonk without ever losing the thread that held it all together, which was the Stones' absolute certainty about who they were. Keith Richards played rhythm guitar like a force of nature with a brain, loose and dangerous, but always exactly where it needed to be. Charlie Watts anchored everything with a steadiness that made the looseness around him feel completely safe. For Ronstadt, who spent her career learning from the greatest bands in the world, this album was a masterclass she returned to again and again. The Stones on this record sounded like a band that had absorbed every strand of American music and made it entirely their own. That was exactly what Ronstadt was always trying to do. Exile on Main Street showed her it was possible. 1. Trio. This one was personal in a way that no other album on this list could match.
Don't put your life in the hands of a man.
Trio came out in 1987, and it was the result of nearly a decade of trying. Ronstadt, Dolly Parton, and Emmylou Harris had first talked about making a record together in 1978, but schedules and record labels and the general chaos of 3 enormous careers kept getting in the way. When they finally got into the studio together in 1986, something happened that none of them could have fully predicted. 3 voices that each could fill a room on their own combined into something that felt sacred. Ronstadt said she and Harris always wanted Parton to sing lead on everything, because Dolly's voice was simply that extraordinary.
But it was really fun, and the audience was great, and they really liked it, so it was great.
What made Trio untouchable for Ronstadt was what it proved about harmony singing. That 3 distinct voices could lock together and create something none of them could achieve alone. She had always wanted to be part of a group rather than a solo artist, had always believed that singing with other people unlocked things in her voice that she could never access by herself. Trio was the fullest realization of that belief. It won 4 Grammy nominations, sold over 4 million copies, and sounded like nothing else in country music at the time or since. The album covered everything from traditional folk to Neil Young to Randy Newman, and made all of it feel like it had always belonged in the same place. For Linda Ronstadt, it was not just her favorite record. It was proof of everything she had always believed about what music was for. 7 albums, 7 records that shaped the greatest interpreter music has ever known. Linda Ronstadt listened deeper than anyone alive. She heard what made each one untouchable. Then she spent her whole career proving she understood. Subscribe for more stories from the legends who changed everything.